The termination letter rested on the polished mahogany table between them, and Harper Lansing felt the weight of the decision even before she spoke it aloud. Malik Kingston sat across from her, hands still, eyes steady, offering no defense she had not already prepared herself to ignore. She read the charge, 17 instances of tardiness over a 4-month period, and watched for some flicker of resistance, some sign that the man in the gray work shirt might fight to keep his position. No words came. He simply stood, offered a quiet thanks that sounded more like farewell than gratitude, and walked out into the corridor where Bradford Whitcomb waited with folded arms and a satisfied smile barely concealed at the corner of his mouth. Later that evening, Harper found herself seated at her mother Eleanor's kitchen table in the leafy neighborhood of Dilworth, nursing a cup of tea she had not asked for but needed desperately. Eleanor poured from a ceramic pot and spoke with the casualness of someone sharing weather reports about her new neighbor, a man who had appeared one afternoon with a toolbox and repaired her leaking gutter before she could even offer payment. Harper half listened until her mother mentioned his name, and the word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Malik. 5 months earlier, a moving truck the color of dust had rolled to a stop on Maple Bend Road, carrying a single father and his 8-year-old daughter toward an uncertain future in a small clapboard house. Imani, her hair in tight braids and her eyes serious beyond her years, had climbed down from the passenger seat and surveyed their new home with quiet assessment, asking only if this was truly where they would stay. Sue had chosen the property for reasons that felt almost sacred in their simplicity. It was affordable enough to fit his modest budget and situated within the school district that could offer his daughter the advanced education she deserved. More importantly, the front porch faced east, allowing the morning sun to flood the kitchen each dawn, a detail that had become essential to him in the years since his wife's passing, though he could never fully articulate why to anyone, not even to himself. He set down a box containing remnants of a life before grief and stood on the cracked walkway, telling himself silently that this place could become a sanctuary for his child, a space where she might heal and grow and learn to laugh again without reservation. Across the low picket fence, an older woman in a faded sun hat straightened from her tomato patch and greeted them with the easy warmth of someone who had lived on Maple Bend Road for 4 decades. Eleanor introduced herself with genuine kindness, offering vegetables from her abundant garden and a smile that required nothing in return. Imani accepted 2 tomatoes with the careful reverence of a child handling precious things, and Eleanor watched the girl cross the lawn toward her father with a feeling she had not experienced in years, a sense that something important had arrived in her quiet neighborhood, something worth paying attention to. 3 weeks later, Malik filled out an application at Lansing Logistics, a regional distribution company housed in a sprawling warehouse complex south of Charlotte. The form required him to list previous employment, and he wrote 3 sparse lines that revealed nothing of his past achievements. A community college maintenance position, a brief stint with a moving company, an unspecified role at a regional supply firm that no longer existed under that name. On paper, he appeared ordinary, unremarkable, exactly the kind of anonymous applicant who might pass through the hiring process without generating notice. Maggie Doyle, the shift manager, reviewed his application quickly and conducted a brief floor walk to assess his capabilities. By lunchtime, she had offered him the position, later confiding to her husband that the new hire demonstrated more intuitive understanding of warehouse logistics than anyone she had interviewed in 22 years. She could not comprehend why a man with such evident skill would accept an entry-level position, but she understood enough about human dignity to know some questions should remain unasked. Malik's daily routine began at 5:30 each morning, when he rose to prepare a simple breakfast and pack Imani's lunch in a canvas bag embroidered with her name. By 6:15, they were in the old gray sedan, driving 40 minutes northwest to Belmont, where the regional gifted program operated from a modest brick building behind a Methodist church. The commute had become a ritual, a sacred space where father and daughter existed in comfortable silence, listening to audiobooks chosen by Imani the night before, and sharing a quiet companionship that required no words. Some mornings she fell asleep against the door, and Malik would adjust the rearview mirror to catch glimpses of her peaceful face, treasuring these moments of vulnerability she still allowed him. By the time he returned from dropping her at the school gate and fought through morning traffic to reach the warehouse, the clock consistently read 7:50. The shift began at 7:30. Every single day he arrived approximately 20 minutes late, never offering excuses or explanations, simply working through his lunch breaks and staying late to compensate for the missing time. His colleagues had long since stopped asking questions, recognizing that whatever burden he carried was his own to bear. In the glass tower overlooking the city, Harper Lansing attended her 9th board meeting since inheriting her father's position. Bradford Whitcomb, her father's longtime chief operating officer, presented workforce discipline statistics with evident satisfaction, noting that productivity had slipped during the leadership transition, a subtle dig that did not escape Harper's attention. She observed him from the head of the table, trying to recall whether her father had ever employed such pointed criticism, and concluded that the tone was entirely new, entirely calculated. After the meeting, Maggie paused in the corridor beside another supervisor and mentioned, almost offhandedly, that 6 of the 8 employees Bradford had personally disciplined over the past 6 months were black, despite a workforce roster that did not reflect that pattern. The supervisor met her gaze, offered no response, and continued walking, leaving Maggie to file the silence alongside the observation. She had worked at Lansing Logistics long enough to recognize the difference between genuine oversight and willful blindness, and she knew with growing certainty that she had witnessed something significant. During her first walking tour of the warehouse floor, Harper passed through the loading bay and paused without understanding why. A man in a gray shirt was rearranging pallets with quiet precision, working alone, demonstrating a patience that made difficult labor look effortless. She noticed immediately how the aisle flow had changed, how picking routes had become more efficient, how the entire section operated more smoothly than anything she had seen elsewhere. No one had instructed him to make these improvements. He had simply observed a problem and solved it without seeking acknowledgement or praise. Bradford materialized at her elbow within seconds, steering her toward the elevators with practiced urgency, dismissing the worker's efforts as irrelevant. Harper allowed herself to be led away, but she glanced back once, noting that Malik never raised his head, never sought to claim credit for his quiet contributions. The following Monday, an email bearing Bradford's signature appeared in every warehouse employee's inbox, announcing a new zero-tolerance policy regarding lateness. 3 incidents would trigger formal review, 5% would result in termination. No exceptions for family circumstances, no accommodations for educational obligations, no review of individual situations, only rigid enforcement that left no room for nuance or compassion. The warehouse staff read the message with growing unease, exchanging glances across the break room that communicated everything words could not express. Maggie read it twice in her office, then walked to the elevator and rode up to the executive floor, determined to raise her concerns directly. The assistant on duty received her politely explaining that Mr. Lansing was engaged in budget reviews and that all meeting requests should be routed through the COO's office. Maggie left a written note, carefully folded with her name and extension, but it disappeared without response, and no meeting ever materialized. Malik continued his routine unchanged, recognizing that the policy applied to him but unable to alter the fundamental facts of his life. Imani's school began at 7. The drive took 40 minutes. He would remain late, regardless of the consequences, and he accepted this reality with the stoic resignation of someone who had already weathered greater storms. During his second tour of the floor, Harper approached Malik again, this time stopping beside him as he checked inventory against a handheld device. She mentioned the new policy, expecting some reaction, some appeal for understanding. He acknowledged her statement without emotion, confirming that he had read the policy and understood its implications. She pressed for more, asking whether he required accommodation, but he simply repeated that the rule was the rule, leaving her with nothing further to say. Bradford appeared almost immediately, as if conjured by tension, and Harper allowed herself to be led upstairs once more, aware that something significant was unfolding beneath the surface of ordinary warehouse operations. That afternoon, Maggie accessed the internal personnel system and reviewed Malik's sparse employment history, finding little to explain the anomalies she had observed. Acting on instinct rather than suspicion, she opened a private browser window and searched his name, expecting to find nothing of consequence. The results nearly stopped her breath. The first page displayed a corporate biography on the Vandermeer Global website, identifying Malik Kingston as a senior supply chain systems engineer with 12 years of experience, designer of the Eastern Routing Framework that nearly every regional distributor now licensed for use. The photograph showed a younger man in a suit, unmistakably the same person who now wore a gray work shirt in her warehouse. Maggie sat very still, reading the biography twice, studying the photograph, connecting dots that had seemed unrelated just moments before. She recalled the subtle improvements in warehouse routing, the handwritten notes she had passed up to Bradford's office, the careful suggestions that had disappeared without acknowledgement. She printed the page, folded it carefully, and locked it in her bottom drawer, uncertain what to do with the knowledge, but certain it was too important to ignore. She attempted to reach Harper 3 more times that week, each request rerouted through assistance, each call returned by staff, each appointment postponed indefinitely into the following month. Bradford's office occupied the floor directly above Harper's, and he monitored calendars with the vigilance of someone who understood the importance of controlling information flow. On Saturday afternoon, Malik knelt on Eleanor's porch, repairing a loose step while Imani sat on the railing reading aloud about whales and their remarkable ability to hold breath for extended periods. Eleanor brought lemonade and watched them both with an expression she had not worn in years, something between contentment and gratitude, the quiet recognition of family found rather than inherited. The afternoon sun filtered through magnolia leaves, casting green and gold patterns across the weathered wood, and Imani asked serious questions about frogs and reality, receiving answers that satisfied her young mind, and left Eleanor marveling at the simple beauty of the scene. The following Monday brought the 3rd week of Bradford's strict policy, and Malik arrived late once again, as predictably as sunrise. Bradford personally walked the floor each morning now, clipboard in hand, recording every minute of delay with visible satisfaction. Other supervisors noticed his presence but remained silent, understanding the unspoken rules that governed warehouse life. By Friday afternoon, Harper's desk held a thick file containing 17 separate entries, each one stamped, signed, and witnessed, with no notes from the employee and no requests for accommodation. Harper summoned Malik to her office, intending to understand the pattern behind the numbers. He arrived in his work shirt, hands clean but roughened by labor, and sat across from her without being asked. Up close she noticed details she had missed before, the lines around his eyes, the quiet steadiness of his gaze, the absence of resentment in his posture. She asked why he remained consistently late, and he explained simply that he had a personal obligation each morning, one that could not be adjusted. She pressed for details, for something to work with, but he offered only acceptance, stating that he would accept whatever decision she needed to make. He thanked her for his time and left, and Harper found herself unable to return immediately to her paperwork, replaying the conversation in her mind. Bradford appeared within seconds as if he had been waiting in the corridor, and reminded her that the board expected decisive leadership. She signed the termination order the following Tuesday, reading Bradford's memo 3 times before affixing her signature, troubled by something she could not quite identify. The meeting itself was brief and clinical. Harper read the charges. Malik offered no defense, and the decision was final. He stood, extended his hand, and thanked her for the opportunity, his palm warm and steady, a callus at the base of his thumb that she would remember longer than any words spoken. In the parking lot, Maggie waited beside his sedan, hands deep in her coat pockets, unable to speak the words she had prepared. She watched him drive away and returned inside, determined to act on what she knew. That evening, Harper sat in her mother's kitchen, listening to Eleanor describe the kind neighbor who had fixed her roof and brought her soup, and driven his daughter 40 minutes each morning to a school that believed in her potential. Eleanor mentioned the routine casually, unaware of the significance, and Harper felt something shift in her chest, a recognition, a connection, a dawning horror at what she had done. She drove to Maple Bend that night, parking across from the modest house, watching silhouettes move behind yellow curtains. A man's figure, a child's smaller shape beside it, reaching upward with the trust only children possess. She sat in the darkness for several minutes, then drove home without sleeping, replaying every decision that had led to this moment. The next morning, Harper arrived at her office before dawn and requested Malik's complete personnel file. She read every page twice, noting the thin employment history, the missing credentials, the absence of any explanation for the man she had met across her desk. She summoned Maggie Doyle to her office and listened as the shift manager revealed everything she had discovered: the Vandermeer biography, the blocked meeting requests, the spreadsheet documenting discipline patterns over 8 months. When Bradford arrived, Harper confronted him with the evidence. The smile left his face gradually as she laid out the facts: his failure to verify employment history, his interception of meeting requests, his pattern of disciplining black employees disproportionate to their presence on the workforce. She dismissed him from her office and watched him close the door with the same controlled precision he used for everything, the latch clicking softly into place. That evening, Harper returned to Maple Bend, not to her mother's house but to the small house next door. She watched through the window as Malik helped Imani with homework, leaning down to listen to something she said, laughing at whatever absurdity she had shared. Harper had never witnessed his laugh before, the shape of it visible through glass, and the sight made her grip her steering wheel until her knuckles paled. The following morning, she knocked on his front door. He opened it wearing a clean undershirt and jeans, holding a coffee mug, his expression moving through surprise and recognition before settling into calm acceptance. She explained why she had come: to offer an apology, to explain the changes she had made, to request that he consider returning to the company with flexible hours and a position worthy of his talents. Malik listened without interruption, then set the envelope on his kitchen table and said he would consider the offer. From across the side yard, Eleanor called them both to lunch, and they gathered around the small table, Imani telling a long story about Cornelius the frog that made Eleanor laugh in all the right places. Reached for the bread basket at the same moment, their hands meeting above the woven surface. Neither moved for a full second, and then Malik said, "After you," and Harper said, "Thank you," and the moment passed without comment. But neither of them quite forgot it. Weeks later, Harper stayed late at the office and found Malik's light still burning. She made 2 cups of coffee and carried them to his office, standing beside him at the north window overlooking the lights of Charlotte. They stood close but not touching, sharing silence and the view and something more precious: the possibility of forgiveness, the beginning of trust, the fragile hope of rebuilding what had been broken. For taking the job, and he thanked her for offering it twice, and they stood together in the quiet, not looking for forgiveness or redemption or anything beyond this moment. But somewhere between a broken porch step and a Sunday dinner table, between a folded biography in a drawer and an envelope in a coat pocket, they had discovered something neither had anticipated: a second chance, not just at work, but at something far more meaningful. Outside, the lights of Charlotte continued burning, bright against the darkness. Inside, 2 people stood together in the quiet, and did not move for a long time.